Well, good evening. For me, I think it's good morning. So if I fall asleep on stage, I'm sorry. This time zone jet lag thing is interesting. Okay, so we saw a lot of very cool things today, but how are we actually supposed to get work done if everyone is telling us something different, something interesting, something cool, something fun? One project, how can it succeed if being pulled in so many directions? But on a more serious note, how can we pay attention with an awesome view like this? Well, I wrote that slide before I was here, so thanks for the curtains. But seriously, thank you to the organizers for a really great conference. Okay, so a little bit about me. On the intranet, that's me. I don't like it, the picture, but I'm afraid to change it because it's like my identity. So at the last conference I was at, I said the same thing, and someone afterwards came up to me and said, well, this is a happy medium where people would still recognize you, but it would look like you. I haven't had the guts to switch it over yet, but what do you guys think? Should I? Yeah? Okay. I'll give it a go. All right, so I'm Canadian. I'm sorry. I live here in the US. They think this is Canada. I'm from where it says wheat. It's true there's wheat, but there's also lots of mosquitoes. They got that wrong. I really love open source. It's my hobby, and they pay me to do open source now, which is pretty cool. Going to work every day and getting to do my hobby, it's really awesome. So I'm an Ember core team person. I work at Yahoo, and I wear two shoes at Yahoo. On one side, I live in the ivory tower of open source, where there's no deadlines and nothing. It's wonderful. No bugs, no issues, no people. It's great. And the other shoe, I live in reality, where there's deadlines and people need to ship stuff. More specifically, I'm a UI architect for the ads and data group at Yahoo, and they have lots of very big applications across lots of different frameworks. In this group, there's a lot of Ember, and we see some very interesting problems. And having this balance, I really like it, because on one side, I can see what day-to-day my teammates are facing, and on the other side, I can see not only can I give them advice to work around the problem, but maybe I can make the problem disappear entirely. And that's always the best way to solve a problem. As part of my role at Yahoo, I also am a committee member of TC39. Who here knows what TC39 is? Okay, so you know what JavaScript is, right? You heard my Canadian accent in there. So JavaScript is a standardized language. It's actually called ECMAScript. It's a European thing, apparently. And TC39 is the 39th Technical Committee from ECMA set out to standardize, improve, and evolve JavaScript itself. This is all enabled by my extremely patient wife, who has to deal with my OCD open source contributions and technical ramble. We're crazy bird people. In my talks, I like to have discussions. So if you see something you disagree with, you totally agree with, you just want to say something, please just say it. It's fine. If we're running over time, we'll cut it off. We can talk about it later. But really, the most important thing we can do here is have a good conversation. And I'm ready to take your questions at any time. OK, so back on topic. Given all of these things, how are we supposed to actually be productive? And given all of these things changing so quickly, is that actually a good thing? Well, I'd like to start with a little bit of history. Don't worry, there's not going to be a test. So this JavaScript thing. So he gave it to us. Who here knows what's his name? Brendan Eich. All right. So he actually set out in 1995 to do this. He wanted to put a scheme in the browser. Who here is familiar with Scheme? It's a functional programming language. It's actually quite nice. And this probably would have been wonderful. But there was this 800-pound gorilla, Java, and Java applets were going to be the future, and there was pressure. It's like, well, this scheme thing, it's good, but really, you have to make it like Java because that's the only thing people are going to want to program in. So Mocha, which was its original name, became LiveScript, became JavaScript. And Mocha, a scheme-like thing, was functional. And JavaScript, sneaky functional. And I think Brendan Eich did this. He snuck, like there's new and void zero. Who uses void zero? It just exists to distract people. It's really a functional programming language dressed up in a little bit of Java. It's quirky, and it will forever confuse recruiters and non-technical co-founders, and apparently presenters at conferences. So basically, Java plus scheme equals JavaScript. And at the beginning of time, let's face it, this is what people use JavaScript for. Cool little things that followed your mouse on your GeoCities website. I mean, when I first saw this, I'm like, that's so cool, how can I do this? I never thought that I would actually be working full-time, almost entirely using JavaScript. I thought it was a joke. I mean, maybe it is, but it's working. All right, so then all of a sudden this thing popped by, XML HTTP request. And sometimes I wonder if they talk to the PHP guys here in terms of how to name this API, because HTTP, why is it lowercase? But all right. But it really still wasn't taken very seriously. So funny side tangent. In university, I lost a bet. And I was in a bioinformatics course, and the bet was I had to do all of my work for the entire semester in JavaScript. I didn't think it was going to work, but hey, I did. Got some laughs. But I noticed something pretty cool. It was surprisingly concise, kind of a happy mix between FP and OO, and you could do some cool stuff with it. And the big win actually was that particular course you could write your solutions in any language, but that meant the prof and the TAs had to compile, install, get all of these other languages working on their machines to test your code. And all they had to do was open a browser, drop in their sample into a big text area, hit enter, and boom. It took some time, but it did the calculations, and it worked. So I think we have JavaScript today entirely because it is everywhere. It's kind of a quirky language, happened by accident. Someone set out to give us a scheme, turned into this Java-like thing that's a scheme, maybe. But luckily, a bunch of other people had this idea before me. And cool stuff started to be built. I think the Microsoft Outlook app was one of the first really big apps to take advantage of Ajax in JavaScript. But during this period, it was really strange. Everyone's solutions were very bespoke. Everyone did something pretty custom. And let's face it, the platform was extremely deficient in many ways. But people were creative. People pulled a MacGyver. And they built some pretty cool, compelling things. And this led to an interesting evolution. We are where we are today. Anyway, so after the bespoke solutions, and there still are bespoke solutions today, we started to see a lot of shared solutions popping up. I left a bunch out here, but actually I stole this slide from someone else, and they left a bunch out, so don't blame me. But what you're seeing over time is more and more frameworks. And as an earlier talk today mentioned, just today there were more frameworks written than people in this room. So clearly we can't display them all, but yeah. Okay, so the platform has evolved. This is both JavaScript, the DOM, browsers, computers, everything has evolved. And for some reason, people are still speculative if it's going to continue to improve. If our pains today will actually go away, are we just making more of a mess? And I would like to remind everyone who's pessimistic about it becoming better and better that a few years ago, this was a hard problem in web development. Right? So if you search this on Google, there's like almost 1 million results on how to do rounded corners. We fixed this. Or if we can fix this, I think we can fix many other things. And in fact, we have. But at the time, if you told someone that rounded corners would be a simple primitive of the web, border radius, I mean, simple, I mean, it works, but I wouldn't have believed you. Who here honestly would have believed that rounded corners would ever actually be solved? All right, one person jokingly in the back. Clearly you were a Java developer at that time, right? I actually like Java, I'm just being silly. Okay, but not only did we get rounded corners, but our JavaScript performance literally has improved 100-fold. And it's still improving as we speak. That's pretty impressive. So my Needleman-Wunsch genetic algorithm probably would run reasonably fast today. Probably still wouldn't use JavaScript for it, but anyways. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the changes in JavaScript. And there's this terminology of ES5, ES6, that's ECMAScript version 5, ECMAScript version 6. JavaScript actually has no more versions. JavaScript has turned into a rolling spec. Every year, whatever was completed in the specification, that is that year's version of JavaScript. So if this year we did nothing, ES 2016 would be very empty. It would be a document that said nothing. It basically has like preamble and done. But if we do accomplish a few things, it gets rolled in here. Now, the benefit of this is there's no pressure to rush things in before they're ready. In the past, for ES4, which no one knows about because it never landed, they tried to fix everything. So much pressure, so many edge cases, nothing was ready, it was basically abandoned in favor of a more rolling model. Today we have that rolling model, and it's succeeding, I think. So, who is actually behind these changes? It's not just me, I promise. I feel very intimidated at these meetings because I feel like I'm just very out of place. But there's some very capable people there. So Brendan Eich is one of the members of TC39. There's also language experts, people who design Smalltalk and other languages are present. Implementers of the popular runtimes are present. Framework authors. React framework library, they can't decide, but they're there, and it's important that they're there. Application developers are represented. Domain experts, so sometimes there's some concurrency work done, some threading, some SIMD work. Domain experts from industry are brought in to consult. And most importantly, the community. If you're interested in JavaScript, go to this site, participate in the mailing list. You can actually contribute, fix things, improve things. Anyway, so back to some of the changes. Now, everything is moving very quickly, but I think everyone can agree this is good. Yeah, all right. Anyone protests, we can protest. But, well, I mean, come on. Another one, pretty obvious, right? Let's just stop typing stupid characters that we don't need. Now, this one, I think, maybe has confused some people, but basically var is broken. If you're using a transpiler or a browser that does support let, just use let. Pretend var never existed, it was a mistake, but we couldn't remove it because the most important feature of JavaScript and the web is that sites from 1994 continue to work. This is important. Const, basically, this is because programming is hard and user error happens, so this is a hint to humans that the compiler will reinforce. Template literals, basically this is just nice. All those plus signs and new lines, garbage. Class syntax, I think some people prefer the functional version of JavaScript, but really classes are used in most of the main frameworks, and each one has a bespoke implementation of the class syntax. Why? Basically, if you tried to implement it correctly, it would look like this. And this is obviously a win. Because I can't even, I had to look this up to figure out how to do this, and does someone want to write the thing on the left? I don't think so. Anyways, back on track. So, although things are moving quickly, I think this last slide actually indicates we have to learn less to be successful with JavaScript. So rather than falling into a pit of despair of which prototype you should use and how the inheritance works, you basically fall into a ball pit of happiness and success. And as a bonus, there's a future where all of these things that implement their own ad hoc class system could theoretically share some code, or at the very least work the same way. Another interesting thing that's been added is promises. This is promises. Not terribly compelling. But then you have examples like this. That is, I think there's even bugs in that. I tried to figure out all the plays that would try catches. It was horrible. The promise equivalent is this. This is much more readable, terse, handles everything. It scales. There's also some enabling features that really I don't believe most application developers need to deal with, but they're very important. So for example, in the DOM, there's element.addEventListener. You cannot actually implement this yourself, because if you implement it yourself, you have to add element.removeEventListener. Otherwise, the callback will be retained. This is only possible with a construct like a weak map. So this exists. This is an enabling piece of technology. What is a weak map? It's a map that doesn't retain. So imagine you have a component that wants to put data somewhere else. That's the component. This is the model it wants to put data on state on. That's the state. The weak map is this secret piece of tape that when either one of them goes away, the runtime knows to yank, and boom, that state is gone, no memory leaks. But for the most part, I don't think app developers need to care about it. They just want it to work, and framework authors to deliver it, or library authors. Another enabling technology is Asm.js. Be really cool if we could compile Unreal Tournament to the browser, get it to run. It's Asm.js. So it lets you take different things that have an LLVM backend and compile them to JavaScript and run them. You can run Unreal Tournament in the web. That's pretty cool. So on the horizon, there's other cool things. Now, observables are a really cool construct. We've been having some issues figuring out how they play out in the language with other constructs, but there's a path forward here, and I hope that we can work to make it true. Async await. This is a mechanism by which we can take promises and totally kill callback hell. Much nicer. Decorators. React likes them. Ember likes them. Angular likes them. That's probably the only thing all three frameworks agree on. They're pretty neat. So basically, they give us back the dynamism that we had before with the very verbose syntax, but we can use the concise syntax here. Shared array buffers. Oh no, why is my slide not playing? Okay, my video's not playing. Basically, shared array buffer will allow, hypothetically, if it gets accepted, will allow multi-threading in the browser. In JavaScript. The important part here is if you port Unreal Tournament to the browser, you want to utilize all the cores. It's kind of scary. We'll see what ends up happening. Oh, it's working. Awesome. So this is multi-threading, right? All right, another enabling technology is WebAsm, WebAssembly. And basically, it's Asm.js, which is take something, compile it to JavaScript, but without having to parse the JavaScript. So it's straight to something that the runtime V8 or JSC can run, but without requiring the upfront parse time. If you're parsing 100 megabytes of JavaScript, it takes a long time. This skips that step. Platform improvements, web components. Streams, service workers, offline support, caching, it's great. Really, it's not all perfect, but it's really growing up. We can start doing some pretty cool things here. Now there's the libraries. There's a lot of them. In fact, microjs.com has like 1 million libraries on it. Navigating this is extremely hard for us. Basically, you have this, why you know virtual DOM, but why you know templates, why you know observables, why you know promises, but really a promise is an observable. And templates and virtual DOM can work together. But these points seem to be contention. I don't know why. But this is all extremely overwhelming, I think. How do you navigate this? But I think this is actually good, and let me explain why. I think we can learn to make good choices. So this is a generalization, but libraries, they can be unstable. Frameworks have to be a little bit more stable. Platforms like the web have to be extremely stable, and the language has to be very stable. So language has to be mature. Libraries can be immature. The language being mature and growing enables libraries, frameworks, and the platform to grow. But on the other side, libraries enable innovation and experimentation, so that we can inform how the platform must evolve and the language must evolve before we have to commit to something like app cache, maybe. So as things slide from left to right, they become more distilled, they become polished. They then enable further things, further experimentation and research. So, safe, risky. Relying on a feature in the language, very safe. Relying on a feature in a library, well, it depends on the library, but it can be risky. It's definitely going to be more risky than relying on a feature of the language. But we can't just use no libraries, but we have to weigh this in the balance. Permanent, transient. Again, so the iteration cycle here allows the web to improve. We have to be aware that these libraries exist to allow iteration, and if we're being overwhelmed by it, we can take a step back and ignore the ones that we don't find interesting if we're still being successful without them, or choose the ones that we want. Beware of this, the hype cycle. Everyone is searching for a silver bullet, and oh my goodness, it's virtual DOM, or oh my goodness, it's templates, or oh my goodness, it's a command line tool, that's awesome. But really, this always happens. But most of these ideas have positives and negatives, and as they mature, they become valuable. And it isn't just Ember, it's for everything. So libraries can freely innovate, higher risk, but extremely important. Frameworks distill and combine libraries. They help libraries work together and present them to a developer team without them needing to figure out how to glue these 12, 15, 30, 40, 800 libraries together. So they provide a cohesive experience. Frameworks can, in fact, abstract the risk away. With the right public API, a framework could switch out an underlying library for a better one, which does allow for safer experimentation, but sometimes can be limiting. But typically, when a library gets good, some framework adopts the concept, like Angular utilizing Rx observables. This is healthy. So the next part, warning. I really wanted to give an unbiased talk, but I'm a core team member of one of these frameworks. I'm going to give a little pitch, but you can take it with a grain of salt. So Ember, it's not just a cute hamster. It's a community-run framework, and it's not just me, it's many people. We actually have a core team of these people. Most of these people work in different companies. LinkedIn, Twitch, TV, Yahoo, couple independent consultants, Tilda. Igor just got a job. Where is he working? Can't remember. My bad. So Ember is a pretty all-encompassing solution. You have a command line tool, you have Ember itself, you have Ember data. So Ember CLI is actually totally optional, and Ember data is totally optional. But at EmberConf, out of 950 people who attended, 943 people use Ember CLI. They don't have to. They use it because they don't have to think about build tooling. Everything just works. It's great. It's nice. And when it doesn't work, they work together to fix it and improve it. The 7 remaining people, they're desperate to get on it. They still need to do some work. All 3 of these things are actually a curated set of interoperable microlibraries. Ember CLI, for example, has 18 versions of make.jrp in its node modules dependency folder. That isn't a good thing. That's an NPMism. Here's some companies, some of many, who you might recognize that use Ember quite a bit. So Ember's primary goal is this: stability without stagnation. So in the light of this domain improving so drastically, can we provide these improvements without people having to rewrite their web app every month, every week, every year? So in the past early days of Ember, this was not possible because we didn't really know what it needed to be. But in the last 2 years, we've sort of figured it out. One way that we do this, in the last few years, we've had 174 releases. We have 3 channels, so you can choose your risk tolerance. Canary is every single commit that happens. Beta is a weekly thing. And releases are the stable parts of beta get promoted to release, and they happen every 6 weeks. So typically, we find bugs pretty early. We can iterate on them. And we can experiment with the cool new features in Canary without risking people who have a lower risk tolerance. During this time, we've switched out the entire rendering engine 3 times with making no breaking API changes. And we're working on the fourth. So this is a way a framework can isolate you from underlying churn. Sometimes we do have to make a change. We'll talk about that in a bit. So at Ember conference, we displayed the results of a community survey, and it seems like about 75% of Ember users are on Ember 2x, which is pretty good. It's about 5 or 6 months old. It's not great. I'd love to see 100%, but this is much better than some of our previous upgrade paths. It was a pretty big upgrade. Although Ember 2.0, we kind of cheated. It had no new features. Ember 2.0 actually only removed features. This was important because we wanted to make sure that users could get to Ember 1.13, which was the last stable version of the 1x series. We could prepare, curate, write tooling for them to guide them through the process of upgrading the parts of their application. And over time, in the last 6 months since we've done this, community members have contributed improvements to the guide. So every time someone upgrades, they actually improve the life of everyone else who's trying to upgrade. So this is the whole continuous reinvestment thing. So 2.0, the first framework probably ever to have no new features in a release. We cheated, it all happened in 1.13. But 1.13 had both sets of features. So at that point in time, you could make the switch. But if you're starting a fresh 2.0 app, you don't have the pollution of some of our unfortunate ideas of the past. We make mistakes. So Ember has components. I really like the idea of web components, and I really hope there's a future for them. I think there is, but we have identified some problems with these web components, one of which is if you have a really big application, you have a very limited namespace for what these web components can be called. We have a choice of having org-google, com-google. Like you can have very long component names, but then your application, instead of being div soup, turns out into soups of dashes and names. Components shadow DOM, it's really cool. It isolates CSS, but it doesn't isolate internal components of a component. And I think there needs to be a future for that. For smaller apps, I think it's fine. Or for situations where you're okay with the soup of naming, I think it's okay. But when you have big apps, so at Yahoo, some of our apps are about 500,000 lines of app code written by between 12 and 50 UI developers over 3 years, we would just run out of names if we had no isolation. So Ember introduces some ability for you to create components that are scoped to specific context and isolated. We hope in the future we can interop nicely with web components, but until they allow something like this, I just don't quite see a path forward. That being said, our usage of web components is heavily inspired by it, and we try to participate with the web component standard to make sure it is as good as possible. Another upside of Ember is because of our strong stance on convention, we actually have about 2,272 Ember add-ons you can install via the command line utility, and lots of them are really good quality. Some of them not so good, but the really great thing is they compose well because Ember has two things. It has a highly flexible underlying API and then a very curated happy path API. So add-ons often reach into the more internals that are still public, but they're not part of the public API, and they can extend features that Ember doesn't have. So there's an idea of Ember engines, which allows you to create basically virtual iframes that don't suck of isolation, and it was implemented entirely as an Ember add-on. So we can experiment in our library space without having to introduce these concepts into the framework itself until they're totally ready via add-ons. So I want to be clear here. Ember is only one of many ways to strike a good balance. I think every one of the frameworks today has a different starting point and a different perspective, but we really are cycling in on very similar things. Based on the use cases, based on the core team's goals and motivations, they're all approaching it differently, and hopefully at some point in the future, the thing that makes these frameworks large will continue to shrink, and the underlying platform will be able to level up, and more things will be able to be shared. I think there'll always be a little bit of a taste difference for people, and I think that's fine. We don't all want to, there is no one right way, but I think having 3 or 4 ways to experiment is really healthy, and a whole bunch of libraries to explore the surface area to then inform the frameworks is really healthy. Anyways, you have to decide on your own risk tolerance. You can go for a fully curated experience. You'll be productive, you'll be happy, community can help you out. You can decide to stitch together a whole bunch of bleeding edge libraries and hope for the best, but you have to be realistic. These bleeding edge libraries, they're awesome and important for innovation, but they're very likely to change because they're so bleeding edge. So pick accordingly. If you are planning to build a project that's going to last a long time, you may want to be slightly more conservative for core concepts of that project. But if you're building an application that is a spike, it's a toy, it's an experiment, go nuts. It's important to learn. And I would actually encourage everyone to do both. I've built Angular apps, I've built React apps, I've learned a ton. I've built all of these silly libraries that cause people pain. It's a great learning experience, but I try not to subject my work projects to them if I don't need to. So don't look for the silver bullet, and if you're ever in North America, don't drink this beer. If you think the grass is greener on the other side, it's because it's fertilized with, I don't know what the code of conduct is here, so I'm not going to say anything. Ultimately, use what makes you and your team happy. Sometimes, like with Ember, there's a cost of understanding the opinion. You get some big benefits out of it. I'm sure the other frameworks have similar things. Sometimes that's something that makes a team happy, and it makes them feel enabled, and they can build upon it. They can use it as leverage. Other times, they feel boxed in. Don't fight it. You don't want an unhappy team. So balance is key. Cultivate experimentation. Be risk aware. And let's thank our organizers for a wonderful event. So one more quick thing. If we have time, I don't know how much time we have left. I love talking about tech, as my friend and previous coworker Mike can attest to. If you guys have any questions, thoughts, concerns, grievances, I would love to talk about them until we run out of time, and then we can talk about them afterwards. And then we can continue them on Twitter. I have lots of energy. This whole jet lag thing, I've gotten like my third wind. We're good. Anyways, thank you very much. And
we have actually 8 minutes left, so shoot with any questions you have.
You guys are good? No questions? Tell me about shared array buffer then. How are we going to solve some of the problems there? Do you know what the problems are in shared array buffer? That's a question. Okay, what's up?
So how have you guys managed to be so stable over such a long time and continue to improve and innovate and whatever? Like, what have been your strategies for doing that?
Yeah, so...
That's a gimme, by the way.
I appreciate it, thank you. So I think in the beginning, we weren't stable. And it took us a while to figure out what stability meant. And really what it meant was a very flexible underlying system, but with a curated happy path that not only first-time users and prototypers could use, but those same patterns are the ones that you use when you are building big apps professionally on a regular basis. So by having these guided paths of success that are sufficiently empowering, it allows us to switch out underlying functionality. Obviously, we aren't always right. We make mistakes often. And so what we've done to the system is we've made it so that if we're going to break a public API, or even if we're going to break a private API that has become pseudo-public, we just have to deal with it for as long as we can. We ensure that there's a deprecation cycle, proper docs and guides to get away, compatibility add-ons. In some cases, actually, we've written AST transforms over our templates to auto-upgrade people's code, or even to transparently convert their code from one style to another. We've written many tools and extensions to enable this. And in some cases, we've just had to pass on new features for some time, or we had to be really creative about how to introduce them. At the beginning of time, this was not true, but as the shape of what we felt was a successful API formed, we were able to figure out these things. I know Ben has a very specific API that he is sad that's not here, but I have to tell him that in our new version of Ember, we have an even better API that's public that he could use. I don't know where Ben is or if he's even here, but I'll have to tell him in person. Does that answer your question? All right. Any other questions?
How good is the observable support in Ember? The observable
Pardon me?
RxJS support in Ember?
We don't have built-in support for it, but we're planning to introduce stuff. It's actually quite, so Ember has this concept of computed properties, and they're basically a form of observable. So writing the transformation from one to the other isn't too complicated. And there's a few add-ons that actually provide support for it. We do want to, as they improve, as hopefully they become standardized, we do want to bake them in. We're a little bit nervous about pulling in new things that haven't been standardized. So we pulled in promises very early, and we were part of the feedback cycle in improving promises, but during that time we ended up having to break apps because our promise implementations changed over time. So we're a little bit conservative like that, but again, that's a place where the add-on ecosystem thrives.
Just for the record, Ben Lesh, who spoke earlier about RxJS, he maintains the Ember add-on, the plugin that brings it into Ember. So I'm not sure what higher degree of official support you would need than that, since he's sort of the point person.
Yeah, that's awesome. I didn't realize that. Sweet. Also, something worth mentioning, I don't remember anything. I'm very good at debugging and figuring out stuff and Googling it. So, all right, no more questions? You're all, oh, there's a question.
How are you planning? What is the plan for ES6 future versions for compatibility? Because now you know when you write code in ES6 you have to use a polyfill for ES5, but when there's a rolling upgrade, so you always use a polyfill and do feature detection, or what is the plan?
So Ember's default project that it generates, it's actually a little bit conservative. So what it does is it focuses on, by default, it focuses only on transpilable compatibility, right? So features that you can get via transpiler step. So arrows, that kind of stuff. You can opt in as a user to using a polyfill. So for features like map set, weak map, etc., in those cases, we allow people to opt into it. The reason is we found that some of the polyfills, they're actually pretty heavy on boot of the application. They throw a lot of errors because they must feature detect these things. So by default, we've just been a little bit more conservative, although we allow people to opt into it if they'd like to opt into it. Our plan is to continue to transpile until a point where these features are, so we support IE 9 and up. So until we drop support for browsers that don't support these features, we're going to transpile across all of our platforms. Now, people can opt in and turn stuff off, but our idea is our default experience should work across all of the supported browsers of Ember, so there's no surprises. Other features like promises and weak map, Ember actually provides as part of the framework because we can utilize parts of Ember to implement them more efficiently or as part of the object model itself. Does that answer your question a little bit? Okay.
Okay.
Oh, I want to add one more thing to that. Ember's object model is often seen as extremely complicated. It's actually kind of simpler than the ES6 one, and we're super excited for the day where we can switch entirely to a transpiled version, and then ultimately to a version that's provided by browsers. And the one thing that we're waiting on is the finalization of the decorators stuff. So we're very happy that the Angular folks are working with us and the React folks to really mature this idea, because it is the missing piece for us using ES6 classes natively, and it will provide a much it'll plug all the holes that Ember's current object model has. But interestingly, a lot of features in ES6 are implemented by Ember, but the plan is, at that point in time, we can gut most of Ember's object model and utilize the ES6 ones once we get the decorators in. And again, because we're slightly conservative, we don't want to introduce features by default that may still change. So if you want to use decorators in Ember, there's actually an add-on you can use, and that allows you to use it. But by default, we're a little bit conservative, so we don't bundle that with applications.
Okay, thanks a lot. If you have more questions, Stefan will stay for the apero, so